Hi, welcome to our Good Friday service from Churnside, linked with Hutton, Fishick and Paxton Parish Church in the Scottish borders. Today's service takes the form of a meditation. So if you could find somewhere comfortable where you could sit for 20 minutes to half an hour, where you could have maybe something to drink, but also where you can focus and imagine yourself walking along the path with Jesus that day. Imagine you're a young pilgrim to Jerusalem in the first century. You have traveled here for the Passover in this holy city. As you're preparing, you weave your way through the crowds in the city to buy all you need. In your small guest room, your wife and 2 sons are waiting for you. You feel your excitement as Jerusalem is buzzing with activity as people prepare for this Passover. Lambs are being carried on shoulders. Sprigs of herbs are in children's hands. Some have fallen along the way and litter the streets. All through the streets, people scurry to make their final arrangements. Maybe, just maybe this year, God will save us from our suffering. The road rises gently before you. Near the top of the street, a mob are gathering. Men are speaking in low tones as their frustration and their disgust fills the air, like smoke from a coal fire. You can smell their agitation as their pores ooze their sweat. You walk a little closer and you see the Roman overlord. He looks annoyed at this human tinderbox at his feet. You can see the stress in his jaw as he clenches, and his eyes dart across the crowd. You shrink a little as you see the battle-hardened soldiers that surround his back like a human shield. And then your eyes are filled with the man standing beside Pilate. Physically, he's an average Jew, average height. But he's unlike any other person on the balcony. Even in his peasant robe, he looks like a royal king. His face has the aura of an imperial emissary that cannot be contained by the dust. He's the only one unafraid. He is the only person in the standoff whose eyes are not darting and whose breath is not staccato. While the eyes of everyone in the crowd burn with hatred, he looks back with empathy. Like a mother, watch a toddler overtaken by a tantrum. Staying just far enough away to avoid being caught up in this bloodbath that may ensue, you hear the gasps of Pilate's cropped words, but your ears cannot make sense of them. Your heart skips a beat as the crowd begins to move their arms and heads frantically, and they erupt into a rhythmic roar of, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" You want to shout too. What words are on the tip of your tongue? What words want to fly from your mouth? Your mouth is dry and your palms are sweaty, and there's a drop of sweat that rolls down your back. You look for a way to escape. Your ears hurt with the percussion of the sound. How can this be? They cannot mean that man whose radiance could calm a storm, whose eyes would heal the most broken of hearts. The soldiers wrap around Pilate and the prisoner, and they are shuffled off into the room extending behind the balcony. The crowd erupts again in defiant hallelujahs. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! And high above their heads, a cloud drifts in front of the sun. As the crowd disperses, you lower your head and press through on your way towards the market. These are dangerous times to come to worship your God. This is the weekend where we recall that some firstborn sons die, and you think of your sons waiting with their mother. Will they be safe? What tragedies will await them? You lower your head as you think of the times that you have spoken to them in anger, when your frustration and your fear have struck them across their very souls. Your words can sometimes flash like knives, the times you have seen in their mother's eye, the disappointment at the harm that you have done to these boys who she carried and she bore and she loves. But this weekend, This is a new beginning for you all, as we have come together as this family, mother, father, sons, starting over in the house of God. Your feet feel heavy as you walk down the road. As you round the corner, you feel your heart sink even further as the man from the balcony is taken into the courtyard by the road. The front of the house boasted of power and of strength. But the rear of this house grumbles of slaughter. The soldiers half drag him, half carry him, and then they tether him to a pole like a lamb set as bait for a blood-crazed lion. A scarred Goliath steps closer and takes aim. Like lightning, the ends of the whip flick through the air, and with devastating accuracy, they flay his skin and expose his flesh. Without pause, the whip circles again and delivers another knife-sharp incision. You wince with every crack, and your stomach knots. You sweat involuntarily and wish you were somewhere else. You cannot help but look into the face of this whip-wielding brute, and you see a deadness in his eyes. There's no spark there. He looks like a man who has lost his soul little by little, with every stroke of the whip, with every peasant or rebel who has bled before him. His arm moves back and forth with no pause, with no hesitation. He's smashing his shame, he's smashing his disgust at life into this groaning stranger he has never met before. Has this shell ever been filled with love? Have all his memories of laughter and celebration been amputated? Were they cauterized by years of swords and infernos? With what little strength he has left in him, the peasant pulls his body away from the whip, but he cannot escape. The bite of the whip echoes across his face in contortions of agony. He bites down hard, he clenches his eyes shut, but there is no escape from this excruciating pain. As you watch, a human disfigured with ribs exposed, you feel nauseous acid rushing up from your stomach into your throat. He opens his eyes and he looks at you, and the glassy pane cannot snuff out the spirit fire of one so alive. You cannot look away from his gaze. Who is this? How can he have such inner peace when his body is being violated so awfully? With that last crack of the whip, the soldiers cheer the gladiatorial brute and rush to release the prisoner. This is no common thief or murderer. He has been accused of the crime of insurrection, and by his own people. There is no one to stand and pray for him, no one to cry, no one to share his anguish. The only participants are soldiers too long away from home, who have lost their humanity on the dusty roads and in the bloody fields. You have seen men like this in every city. State-appointed bullies who thrive on pouring their rejection and their stupidity out in sewage bucket loads. How can people be so crass? How can they have such calloused hearts? In the corner of your eye, you see servants laughing at each other as they watch. And one servant throws a seamless red robe to the soldiers. And everyone hushes for a split second and then scramble to wrap the robe around the prisoner. The red blood that covers his back soaks into the red cloth draped over his shoulders. You feel your knees weaken as the soldiers fall to their knees in feigned reverence. Some members of the accusing mob throw branches at the robed king, and the mouths that once called crucify him now mockingly demand that he be crowned. The green branches are wrapped and entwined and pressed forcefully onto the king's head. Only as you see the bloody lines edging down his forehead, do you see the piercing thorns that pierce into the skin until they scratch the skull. Your heart races as you see the endless malice of people, the worst of humanity and boundless shame. What hope is there for us? How did we fall so far beyond even the hyenas and the jackals? A weary-looking captain shouts, "Enough sport! There is work to be done if you want to spend tonight in debauchery." The robe is stripped, folded to be auctioned later. An already bloodied beam is dragged and then lifted onto the prisoner. As he lifts it, he lifts the crimes of all who have gone before him, and they press into his exposed shoulders with no defense. With stumbling starts, the captive king is goaded towards the road. You realize he is walking straight towards you, his head sagging as exhaustion steals his stride. You try to step aside, to move away. Why did you not leave earlier? Why? Why has the spectacle held you in its web? You move backwards. You try to escape as fast as you can. But there is a human wall behind you, preventing you from getting away. As the captive king draws near, you hear his rasping breath. And then, like a felled tree, he falls forward, his head hitting the road at your feet, with no hands to slow his fall. The timber beam slams into his back and bounces twice. Without a pause, you bend and grab the beam to lift its weight. Could he already be dead? Has he been saved the agony which awaits him further down that road? As the still, wet blood smudges on your tunic, the weight unfelt as your heart races and breathing heaves, he draws a breath and he tries to rise. A stinking soldier towers over you both and bellows at you. You have just become part of this man's death. You have been commanded to lift his cross, to carry his load. The beam is dropped onto your shoulders, and the captive king rises to all fours. With iron resolve, he stands to walk. He walks out front of you like a king leading his subjects out of bondage after a battle won. His body is broken, but his spirit shows unsuppressible victory. Instead of shame and anger at having to carry this man's guilt, you feel your back straighten, your chin rise. To the world, this is a convict's cross, but it lifts your spirit as the standard of a highest king. This cross has more awe-inspiring glory than Caesar's brass eagles that were carried before the Roman legions. You follow the king as the road falls and winds out of the city, and then turns towards the place of the skull. Your legs burn as you climb the hill, and your back begins to spasm. Nearly there, almost. A few more steps, and you will reach the end. The king stands as you stumble to the ground before him. Your knees sag to the ground before this man as soldiers step in to lift the beam. And as they step back, the weight of the sin of the world is lifted. And in humble gratitude, you prostrate yourself before him. This man, like no other, utters peace over you. And your heart heals, your fragmented soul becomes whole. He is thrown beside you, and he holds back the host of heaven ready to save him as his wrists are hammered to the wood.